It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be with you this morning as we explore issues, news, and information. Put our own twist on it. Kind of give you some background and understanding of what we're seeing going on around us. There are a number of things that we're going to talk about this morning, not the least of which is what is all the secrecy surrounding the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty that is being negotiated in secret and has been for the past 5 years. I mean, what is with all the secrecy? Why is everything that has to do with anything within the Obama administration a secret? It's a secret from Congress. It's a secret from the public. I mean, the only people who know about this and are involved in the negotiations of it are insiders from Wall Street and the corporate masters who run this thing. I mean, it's really shameful. And we're going to look into what we're seeing as one of the trends that's really driving this thing. Our second topic this morning is going to be Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act and how it's moving forward. And also, I'm going to throw the NRA under the bus here because they made a major mistake and a faux pas, and they've refused to retract what they've done. I'm incensed that tens of thousands of loyal and hardworking Missourians have worked to try to get this issue brought to the table and resolved so that we would have the strongest legislation against federal overreach related to firearms in the nation. And the NRA came out there and stuck their big nose into our business wrongly and actually messed up the works. I spoke to an ILA representative yesterday, and I was very unhappy with what he had to say. And I'm going to describe it to you. I'm also going to ask you to call the NRA ILA and tell them, mind your own business. And if you're not going to get the facts right, the last thing we need you to do is send out an alert to millions of Missourians that's got the wrong facts. How embarrassing and shameful. Embarrassing for the NRA. Shameful for the fact that they have worked against the best efforts of Missourians on this issue. And I'm ticked. Our third issue. Why is Europe buying the debt that China and Japan are apparently dumping? That doesn't bode well, one, for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost is China and Japan are the two largest holders of our national debt. And perhaps even more importantly, that the entity that's buying that debt as it falls off of their books is Europe. Well, with all due respect, Europe is in an awful lot of trouble itself. And how they expect or anticipate that they're going to be able to pick up the slack that China and Japan are gonna create is beyond my expectation or understanding. Our fourth topic will be who really presents the greatest threat to the United States of America. And I'm going to talk on a broad range of topics here because the truth is it's not, I don't think, some of the primary suspects that are ordinarily are associated with being a threat. In other words, we're told every day that, the greatest threat against the United States is terrorism, and the greatest threat against, well, the truth of the matter is something far different, I believe. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. And we're seeing examples of how the United States is descending into an oppressive regime, much like what you see in Venezuela. And the only difference, I think, is that, our people may be a little bit slicker. They may be a little bit cleaner about it. They've got a media that is really in their pocket. And so it may not be quite as apparent. And unfortunately, we've never experienced this. We're breaking new ground here in the United States. And so I think a lot of folks are resistant to seeing reality for what it is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let's tap into our first topic. By the way, if you'd like to catch our program on our listen line, I strongly encourage you to do so. This listen line is provided to us by a company called Audio Now, and they offer us an ability to have folks listen to radio by phone. So if you're outside of our broadcast, terrestrial broadcast area, or you don't have internet access, or you've got slow internet access and you don't want to download feeds or things like that, or if you're traveling and you just want to listen to the latest program on your cell phone, your NSA personal tracking device, then you can do that too. That phone number is area code 415-325-0725. And the beautiful part of that is it costs you nothing, as long as you've got unlimited long distance either on your NSA personal tracking device or your home phone, which is also your personal tracking device. And the neat part is that it costs you nothing to use the service, and it costs us nothing to provide it for you. And I'm very grateful to Audio Now for making that available to us and our listenership. So thank you, Audio Now. Great job you guys have done there. It's their phrase is radio via phone, and it's a great way for people who don't ordinarily have the ability to listen either over the internet or on a terrestrial broadcast to be able to pick up those broadcasts and listen to them every day. Every day we update it, and every day it's a fresh new program. And when you dial in, you get your own program from beginning to end. You can listen to the entire thing. So, okay. The issue here, as I see it on this issue on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is that there's an enormous amount of secrecy that's going on, number one. And I've talked about this before. In fact, I exposed and read a couple of leaked chapters that we got from WikiLeaks. And then secondarily, and I pointed out to you in that particular episode, what some of the issues were that I took umbrage with, and you should have too. More importantly, though, we're seeing that some of the people that are involved in the negotiations of the TPP are coming straight out of Wall Street and coming straight out of the major multinationals that, quite frankly, are in control of the entire process and all of the negotiations involved. But yet, the people who have to ratify it, i.e. Congress, i.e. the Senate, have been stonewalled. They've begged and pleaded to get copies of these negotiated 26 chapters, and yet they cannot see them. Now, for WikiLeaks to have to leak a document so that our Congress can see it, ladies and gentlemen, there's something desperately wrong. This is the same Congress that has to vote to approve it. How can that be? I mean, what kind of a tin pot dictatorship regime have we turned into, where our Congress has to rely upon WikiLeaks to expose a treaty and the terms of that treaty that they're supposed to vote on? What kind of insanity is this? How can it be? Well, the truth is, the people who are negotiating it, one, are part of the corporatocracy. For an example, a number of the people who are who left their employ in major Wall Street firms have actually were given massive. I mean, Citigroup paid their representative $4 million to leave his employ and to work for the White House as a trade negotiator. Huh? Come on. The truth is that he's only one of numerous others that were involved in this. The Bank of America, the guy who left their firm, Stefan Selig, he received $9 million in bonus pays just before he was nominated to join the Obama administration. Things are awful fishy there. And now he's negotiating a treaty in secret as a trade representative. And what do these banks stand to benefit? How do they stand to benefit? Well, look, the simple truth is these trade agreements are not in the best interest of the average rank-and-file American. These trade agreements are in the best interest of these corporate monstrosities, these multinational, multicultural corporations that are looking for globalization as a simple means and a method to an end. That end is your enslavement to debt and your enslavement to them as a worker drone. That's why Microsoft is so dedicated to the Common Core cause. In fact, what's his name from Microsoft? Bill Gates. Bill Gates came out and actually stated that the premise behind Common Core, which he's wholeheartedly behind and has pumped $5 billion into, that the primary purpose of that was to create people who are, for all intents and purposes, well-regulated to being automatons in industry. They don't want people who are intelligent. They don't want thinkers. They want people who are just smart enough to push the button, just smart enough to flip the switch, toggle this, toggle that, read the instructions, and go on. Why do you think, as part of Common Core, one of the primary aspects of Common Core is that they're not teaching your children to read. They're teaching your children on how to read, not manuals and administrative manuals, not necessarily how to read and utilize critical thinking skills to gain knowledge. This is the equivalent of looking at the days of slavery when the slaves were not allowed to read for the simple purpose that none of the slaveholders wanted those people to gain intelligence, because the minute that they recognized that there was something outside of the little tiny world that they'd been living in, which was essentially this isolated world of a slaveholder's property, right? But remember now, slaves weren't allowed to go to town. They weren't allowed to get they generally never saw the outside of the plantation they were on. So what's the purpose behind all of that? Well, it's real simple. If you keep these people in the dark and they have no idea that there's a world outside of the little bubble that they're living in, then they're easily controlled, and they don't have the opportunity to look outside of their own little isolated location and say, aha, I want some of that. Well, this isn't vastly different. What they're teaching our children in school under Common Core is not how to be intelligent, critical thinkers, how to think for themselves, and how to have creative thought. What they're teaching them to be is little mechanized automatons that do as they're told, make sure that they keep these banks inflated and floated with a lot of debt, all at the expense, frankly, of individualism, freedom, liberty, self-identity, self-reliance, self-governance. That's the truth. And this TPP only plays into that, because what it does is strips away even those limited jobs that have actually been left here in the United States, and it gives these corporate people an opportunity to create an environment where the corporations are making the rules and governments kowtow to them. Why is the mainstream media silent on this? Why are they not talking about it? You don't hear the mainstream media talking about the TPP. Well, I posted 2 articles up on our websites this morning, and I've given you one from the New American, which I thought was rather interesting. See, the truth is that why they're not talking about it is simply the simple reason that they don't, one, have access to the facts, because they're kept in the dark as well. But more importantly, they are owned by the same corporate masters that are pulling the strings and dictating the rules under the TPP. Now, the TTP is only one. There's the TPP and the TTIP. And that the other one is a kind of a quasi-merger, if you will, with the European Union, which is even more disastrous than 13-nation confederacy, including Pacific Rim nations and the United States. I mean, look, we lost the vast majority of the United States manufacturing and production labor to NAFTA and CAFTA. Why would we possibly want to go and do the same thing again under the TPP, which is even more draconian, because what it does is it gives the opportunity for the and I got to tell you, if you're not familiar with this, you really need to understand and do some research on this TPP. 2 of the primary organizers behind it are the RIAA and the MPAA. What are those two organizations? Well, the Recording Industry Association of America and the Motion Picture Association of America. And their primary drives are to totally control and censor the web, the internet. Why? Because they don't like the fact that they're not getting paid when their stuff is shown or their music is played. And the truth of the matter is, they have become, for all intents and purposes, a quasi-dictatorial organization that has an enormous amount of influence on this. I read you from the TPP two of the areas that were, one was environmental, in which the United States is, for all intents and purposes, saddled with these environmental extremist, non-governmental organizations who will, for all intents and purposes, write the legislation and order what the United States has to adhere to regarding environmental issues. I'll be honest with you. I do not want to be subject to the Sierra Club, nor do I want to be subjected to the Nature Conservancy. These people are actually participating in the sense that they will sit on the board. If it's that bad for the environmental issues, then what do you think it's going to be like when we're talking about issues like the motion picture and the recording industries? When they're talking about copyrights and ability for independent and individuals to have patents and things like that. I mean, this is insane, ladies and gentlemen. This is world global governance in a nutshell. And it's being negotiated in secret by a group of elitists and bankers and corporate representatives who represent these corporate. They don't represent you. They don't represent us. They don't represent the country. They represent their own interests. This is a treaty being drafted, created, written, and disseminated by a group of global governance monsters who have no governmental limitations at all. Nor do they have an allegiance to a nation or a country or a level of patriotism associated with the host nation, that being us. You know, it's beyond. Look, you can't even accuse these people of treason because they don't belong under a mantle or an umbrella of some kind of a national entity. These people are representing profit. That's it. That's all they care about. They don't care about you, about your kid, whether or not he or she makes it to college. They don't care whether or not you've got some kind of a retirement fund available to you. All of that is only human resource, ladies and gentlemen. And the bottom line is the only thing that matters to them. And they don't care about sovereignty, and they don't care about nationalism, and they don't care about pride in your nation or labor issues. They don't care. The truth is, Wall Street and multinational corporations are the controlling factors here. This guy Fang, in this report on RT, says, many large corporations with a strong incentive to influence public policy award bonuses and other incentive pay to executives if they take jobs within the government. Ladies and gentlemen, that would be the equivalent of, you know, in the 50s or something, communists infiltrating the United States of America and government within it. These people are no different. This is just communism via an alternative method. This is communism by profiteers. And never make the mistake of thinking that the original communism from 1917 and in Russia was not generated and created again by the same profiteers. It was. It was not a political ideology, and it wasn't a movement of the masses of the people. It was simply nothing more than opportunity for a small group of elitists to be able to enrich themselves. And that's all of these totalitarian governments. Makes no difference what label they're under, whether it's socialist or communist or Marxist or anything else. The controversial TPP trade deal has rankled activists for containing provisions that would newly empower corporations to sue governments. Sue governments. Guess who's going to pay for that? You, through your tax paying. To sue governments in an ad hoc arbitration tribunal method that demands compensation from governments for laws and regulations they claim undermine business interests. Their business interests, not yours. Not our nation's as a general whole. A fact sheet provided by Public Citizen explains how multinational corporations may sue the TPP deal to skirt domestic courts and local laws. The arrangement would allow corporations to go after governments before foreign tribunals to demand that compensation be paid for tobacco, prescription drug, and environmental protections that they claim undermine their expected future profit. Ladies and gentlemen, if our Senate approves this and signs this, this is insane. It is a complete derogation of the sovereignty of the United States of America. And this pig in the White House is actually going out there demanding that he get fast-track authority. Fast-track authority. You know what that means? That means that he can put it up before the Senate, and they can only vote it up or down. They cannot make a single change. There's no amendments allowed. There's no discussion to be allowed. Nothing. All you can do is vote yes or no. And then the arm twisting begins. This is not a way to run a country. This is the way that a republic dies. All right, you've been listening to America's Voice Now. Please join us on our website at americasvoicenow.org. You can find every program that we do up on YouTube at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please make sure that you support our sponsors, including the Battery Station at batterystation.com batterystation.com. You can also call them via telephone at 417-257-7799. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and, of course, any other Pizza Hut across the country. But these particular folks have been instrumental in supporting us on local radio programs, and we appreciate them for that. Make sure that when you get in there on Tuesday night when it's Kids Eat Free and Family Night that you mention that you've heard about it here at America's Voice Now. Jason Henry, an outstanding attorney who handles both state and federal cases, handles criminal and civil issues, and if you're interested in working with him or you can use his assistance, then certainly you can reach him. His telephone number is 417-256-4100. Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, which is on the square in the town of West Plains. You can find them in your local phone book, but you can also visit them on Facebook at facebook.com/Patriot Cigar and Tobacco. You can call them at 257-1776. That's 417-257-1776. They do, by the way, carry accessories and things, and they ship around the nation if you need help. My friend over at Jason over at Wits End Classic Barbershop, it does a great job cutting my hair. And if there's any way that you can participate with him, by all means, get your guy or your husband or your significant other, your boyfriend, in there for a hot lather shave and a haircut. Make sure that you see our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. They can be found on Route 14 and the corner of 63 in the Old Granny's Cafe building. They have excellent prices on things. They have 2 drive-thrus, one in each facility. The other location is directly across the street from the City Pool in West Plains. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to tackle this issue of the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which is moving forward in Missouri, and how that has been working, and what happened with the NRA, ILA, and why they completely messed it up. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Joining us live on our website. I'm glad to have you out there. Good morning to you. If you're catching us on Big Country 99, this is a delayed program. You're catching a recording of it. Our show plays live from 8 a.m. in the morning, and so therefore, if you're listening to us on Big Country 99, the Rooster Radio Network, then you're listening to a recorded episode, and of course, our phone lines will ring to voicemail. You know, this issue of the Second Amendment Preservation Act is one which the state of Missouri has been fighting long and hard. And I got to tell you, I'm really incensed about what transpired last week, where, you know, there's actually two bills out there. And before we get too far into this, I want to just make it clear that there are 3 senators yesterday, or I should say on Monday, and these guys really stepped up to the plate, because there are 2 bills that are in part and parcel in this. One is and if you're not from Missouri, by the way, don't run and shut the radio off. What I'd like you to do is to recognize what they're doing here and try to replicate that in your state. The 10th Amendment Center has stated that what Missouri is doing with our Second Amendment Preservation Act and our Senate Resolution 36, which is a constitutional amendment, is the strongest interposition and nullification process and the strongest pro-gun legislation in the nation. So let me tell you something, folks. If this is, you know, if you live in a state where you are not active in that capacity, then I encourage you to speak to your state legislators and get this kind of stuff on the ballot in your cities and states and your locales. Get this stuff on the books as legislation working its way through your assembly or state Congress or whatever you call it in your given state. These 3 state senators stepped up to work and preserve the rights of Missourians. I sent an email to them yesterday, and the reason I did is because I want to make sure that as often as I throw politicians under the bus, when they do the right thing, I want to make sure that we let them know that that we're proud of them for that we praise them when they do the right thing. You know, I know this may sound insulting to those politicians out there who are listening to this, but we treat you like puppies, right? When you do the wrong thing, we smack you on the nose with a newspaper, or we rub your nose in it. When you do the right thing, we praise you and say, good boy. So the truth is, it's time for us from time to time to pick up the telephone or send an email to these people and let them know that we appreciate the effort that they've accomplished. And in this case, because these guys are actually fighting an interposition/nullification fight, I'm very much in their corner. These guys moved forward the Senate resolution, which is a constitutional amendment to make the right of Missourians and their rights to own and bear and possess firearms unalienable and inviolate. Now, we already have that in our Second Amendment, but we already know that the federal government treats the Second Amendment as if it's some kind of a foot map, right? I mean, these people wipe their feet on it. It's amazing to me how abusive and violative they are of all of these things that we consider to be the basic Bill of Rights. They follow none of them. And a large part of that is because we no longer live in a constitutional republic. But the simple truth is, these people have stepped up to say, we're going to utilize the principle of nullification, and we're going to utilize it in a way that enables us to interpose ourselves and stand between what government is doing and present ourselves as a blockage, if you will, again, between the bully and the people, the bully being the federal government. You know, there are a lot of states, and in fact, I posted an article up there about the secession movement in New York. They want to split upstate New York from New York City and Albany, right? And with good reason. I mean, here you've got this terrorist, Cuomo, and he's a terrorist, ladies and gentlemen. He's a terrorist and a micro-tyrant is what he is. I mean, here you've got a guy who says there's no place for conservatives in the state of New York. Well, then, frankly, all the people in New York ought to just say, that's good, we secede. The secession movement is not limited to New York. It's happening in Maryland. It's happening in Colorado, California, here in southern Missouri. The idea of seceding away from a state that is abusive of the rights of the citizenry and abusive of their resources in terms of their taxes and so forth, we're seeing more and more and more of it every day. And in this case, states are seeking to secede from their capital cities because their governments are unresponsive to them. Well, Missouri, we have the same problems. I mean, our state governments are not responsive to us on a lot of ways, but in other ways they are, and we're going to, I'll explain to you in a moment how they are working on the Second Amendment thing. But the next actions that we're going to see from states who want to secede are going to be that they want to secede from their capitals, or these entire states are going to want to start seceding. And I got to tell you, nullification was the answer that was given to us by both Jefferson and Madison as an interim step before we destroy the Union and the Republic itself. See, the 10th Amendment states that it gives us the guidance that the states are the masters, if you will, and that we, as a nation, created the federal government for the benefit of the states. Yet that's gone topsy-turvy. So the right of those states to nullify federal laws which are abusive of their citizenry is the step that comes in between in the interim that says, listen, we're not necessarily going to secede away from the nation, but what we are going to do is we're going to stand here as the protector of our people against federal overreach. When we see an oppressive national government. But it's funny. These people who decry the principles and the concepts of nullification, it's funny how they use it to legalize marijuana in Colorado and in Washington State, as two perfect examples would show. And they utilize it to legalize same-sex marriage in places where of course, the DOMA was across the board in the United States, right? The Defense of Marriage Act. But all these states that have legalized gay marriage are essentially nullifying that federal law. So why is it that they say we can't use nullification for things like our gun rights and our privacy rights and our rights to free speech, but they can use it when they want to for things like marijuana legislation, legalization, the institution of and in fact our governor is doing it right here, the institution of gay marriage tax credits when our state has a legal prohibition against doing that. So what we have is these three senators. Their names are Richard. I shouldn't say his last name is not Richards. It's Richard, Dempsey, and Schaaf. And these three guys essentially moved forward these two bills. One is SJR 36, and it's a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in the fall in 2014. The idea of that is to make our Second Amendment rights unalienable and inviolate, and not only against federal overreach, but even state overreach, which, let's be candid, just because, state people get out of control too, including our own governor as an example. But in addition to that, they also perfected Senate Bill 613. Now that is the new replacement for last year's Second Amendment Preservation Act, which was passed by both the House and the Senate, and then the governor vetoed. They didn't have enough votes to override the veto, and so essentially we went back to square one. There were some changes made to the bill to clarify some language that was the apparent reason for their refusal to override the governor's veto, and now it's back out again. Now, the other day there was an email that went out from the NRA ILA. Now, the ILA is the legislative arm of the NRA. And there was an amendment that was inserted into Senate Bill 613, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, by a liberal who injected this amendment into it and tried to bollocks up the works. Well, the NRA went out and confused the Missouri legislation with other legislation in other states. And they sent out an alert that said, essentially, your NRA ILA opposes this anti-gun legislation. We seek to create a de facto. It seeks to create a de facto gun owner registry, as well as place unknown civil liabilities on the gun owners, Action on this legislation is expected immediately in the Missouri Senate. Please call your state senator now and urge them to vote no. Wow. So wait a second. We've got the NRA working, and what bothers me about this is not the fact that they were actually trying to generate phone calls to the state Senate. What bothers me is they were wrong. What they were claiming was that this amendment created a gun registry and that there were civil liabilities tied to it. They were saying that there was a $1,000 fine if you didn't report a gun stolen within 72 hours, and that you would be you could be found guilty of a Class A misdemeanor, and you could lose your right to carry if you didn't report a gun stolen. Well, guess what, folks? The amendment didn't say that. Even though it was a very, very liberal, injected by a very liberal guy, there were no penalties listed like that. And the NRA came out and shoved their big foot in our mouth. And after years and years and years of fighting to get this kind of legislation through in our state assembly, they had the unmitigated gall to make a mistake, and they still have not retracted it. I spoke to an NRA ILA representative yesterday. I said to him, how dare you make a mistake like that? Come into our state. First of all, you have an obligation before you go out there and target millions of NRA members with an alert that is demanding that they call their state senator and vote no on a bill, which we've all been fighting for years, and you're not even right. You're not even accurate. And the guy kept making excuses, saying, well, you know, there's other bills in other states that are similar. I said, listen, you weren't sending that alert out for other states and similar legislation. You sent this out for this one. And you guys made a mistake, and you haven't retracted it yet, and they haven't. I got to tell you, I'd like to hear our listeners call the NRA, ILA, and say to them, we're from Missouri, we're mad as heck, and we demand that you retract that statement and send out an email and an alert stating publicly that you made a mistake. I invited to have this guy come on the air. Of course, he says, well, I can't do that. I don't have the authority for that. I said, well, then you can contact your Missouri representatives, and I'll have them on the air. Well, if they're interested, they'll call you. Really? My phone hasn't rung, by the way. Now, I called their toll-free number, which I'm going to give you now. It's 800-392-8683. And what I asked him when I first called up is, how could you have gotten this so wrong? How could you have made a mistake of this magnitude and then thrown a rock into the glass, the fragile glass of the Second Amendment Preservation Act that we've all worked for years so hard to get approved? His explanation to me was, well, there's similar bills in other states. I said, stop right there. I don't even want to hear that noise. The guy actually was taking it personally, and a number of times I said to him, listen, this isn't between me and you. I'm pointing out that you're the representative for the ILA I'm speaking to on the phone. Therefore, you represent the NRA ILA right now. And you're telling me that this is outside of your personal purview. It's not about you. If you don't have the authority, pass me on to someone who does. See, the problem here is that the NRA jumped the gun. They went off half-cocked. And yes, I'm using all these silly gun euphemisms for a reason. The truth is that they dropped the ball, that they shot their mouth off before they went and checked their facts. And they have created a problem. Now, I got to tell you, yesterday, or on Monday, these state senators that I was referencing before, Richard, Dempsey, and Schaaf, these people actually went to the point where they actually had that amendment stripped out of the bill. And they used a legislative parliamentary tactic, if you will, to get it out of there. And so now that whole issue, which they first put in there, or that the NRA ILA was screaming bloody murder about, is not even in there. But more importantly, I don't know. It just seems to me like the NRA jumps in and their primary call is that, well, it's all about sporting. I'm telling you right now, this is not about sporting. You don't have gun rights for sporting purposes to hunt deer or shoot ducks. You've got arms and the right to bear and keep and possess arms in the defense of your nation, not to shoot ducks and deer. I'm tired of hearing that out of the NRA. I know they try to say that so that they try to capture the fringe element who says, well, I don't own a gun and I don't know anything about them, but I suppose, people should have them so that they can hunt. Listen, what is up with the whole principle of everybody constantly wanting to water down the edges so that there's no firm corners? The truth is, we hear that in the Republican Party. Well, we've got to make sure we capture the Hispanic vote. Let me tell you something. I don't care how many lines in the sand you blur. The Hispanics are never going to vote for you. They're never going to vote for a conservative principle because they expect and want exactly what tyrants like Obama will give them. Free crap at the expense of the taxpayers, at the largesse of the Treasury. And they got that from the place they came from, and they have no intention of giving it up when they come here. So stop trying to pander to a whole group that is limited in whether or not they can even want to follow you. Well, we have to capture that Hispanic vote. Let me tell you something. They stand against you in every respect. And they're never going to agree that the conservative principles of freedom and self-governance and self-reliance are the primary functional motivators. Because they came from a place where they never had self-governance. They never had freedom. They never had liberty. I mean, it's really insulting, almost. Because we're all told, those of us who are the true believers and who do believe in self-governance and self-motivation and self-reliance, we're all told, well, we have to ameliorate your position and we have to keep watering it down so that we can grab these people who might follow us on the fringes. So meanwhile, ultimately, what happens? We stand for nothing. The truth is, everybody's lost their perspective. I've said this before, and I've said it on the air. The whole thing feels like gravity has left the earth, and everything is in flux. Nothing is as it should feel or seem. It's like we're floating in air, and there's nothing we can get a hold of and grab a hold of to arrest our movement or at least give us something to push against so we can get our feet back solidly on the ground. It's that way for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. It's that way for a reason. There are state legislators here in Missouri who have done the right thing. And I wanted to take a minute to thank them, and I sent them an email. And I just said to them, I wanted to take a moment to thank each of you for your efforts on behalf of the citizens and your constituents in Missouri on the 2 Senate actions today. I also indicated in there that, furthermore, I'm gratified the following language has been struck, something about convicted felons being barred from having firearms ownership, because I feel strongly that if you are not guilty of a violent crime, if you haven't, I get it. If you stuck a gun in Mrs. McGillicuddy's nose and said, give me your purse, we got a whole different circumstance. But there's a lot of people running around in the state of Missouri that, have a felony from when they were 20 and 19 and 18 and even younger. And here they are 20, 30, 40 years down the road, and they're prohibited from owning a firearm. But worse yet, their families are prohibited. That's even more risky, because now you're saying that not only can you not defend your own home and your property, but no one in your family can own a firearm because they live in the same house with you. That's a problem, and it's a national problem, by the way. But anyway, I essentially went out there and said that I agree that, and I commend you for your stance on SB 613, the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Senator Schaaf, in particular, has done the state a service in removing the Nasheed Amendment, and the state of Missouri will be a far better place, having effectively nullified federal overreach on the rights of every man. On my radio program, I often point out the failures of politicians. However, in contrast, I also strongly encourage my audience to applaud the efforts of those who stand firm for the principles upon which our nation has been founded. You gentlemen today have earned that praise, and they have. I got to tell you, Part of the problem that we have as conservatives, and when I say conservatives, I don't mean in some political sense, I mean patriots. Part of the problem that we have is that maybe we don't give accolades to our legislators often enough when they do the right thing. Because that is what breeds that fear in them that, well, we got to go get the Hispanic vote. Maybe that's a mistake on our part, that we're not offering them enough assurance that we're happy with when they do the right thing. If that constant seeking of the fringe element, if you will, or those who don't even have similarly aligned concepts and principles and beliefs, if that's motivated by the fact that they're not getting enough feedback from us, maybe we need to step up our level of feedback. So here's my challenge to you. Are you communicating with your legislators on a routine basis, not just to bellyache and whine, not just to throw them under the bus, but are you on there and going to them and saying from time to time, hey, you did the right thing here, and I appreciate that, and I just want to thank you. Don't take this as some blanket endorsement of you. I'm not telling you that, because I'll throw you under the bus when you do the wrong thing. But I do want to thank you when you do the right thing. And today you did the right thing. Maybe we need to be better communicators with them. I don't want it to be sycophantic. I think politicians, they see people walk up and, oh, thank you for all that you do, blah, 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 blah. Be specific. Say, look, you did the right thing on SB 613 or SJR 36, and I applaud that. I'm watching you, but I appreciate your effort. Maybe we need to be a little bit more proactive about that. So I encourage you to think about ways in which you can be more proactive with your legislator. And if you're a Missouri resident, by the way, and you're not going to MissouriFirst.org, MoFirst.org, MoFirst.org. That's the site that's been set up, and Ron Calzone is responsible for that. I've talked to you before about this. This is the best way for you to communicate with your legislators, because he created that witness form so you can actually get your statements on the record. You can't beat that, ladies and gentlemen, because it doesn't make it anecdotal. It makes it empirical evidence. That's important. Use it. I applaud Ron for all that he's done with that site. It's just outstanding. If you're not familiar with it, and if you're not from Missouri, make sure that you go and look at it and figure out how you can create that same system for your state. Promise you'll benefit from it. Our state has. Okay. Enough on the politicians. We're going to take a quick break. The question I have in this next segment is, why is Europe buying the debt that China and Japan are dumping? And yesterday there was a note out about Japan and how they have sold the second largest amount ever of U.S. Treasuries in December, and how Europe, through Belgium, has come to the rescue, so to speak, to buy that debt up in its place. And Zero Hedge has a great article out about it, but we're going to talk about some other stuff as well that related to that. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Make sure that you visit our sponsors over at the law offices of Jason Henry, 417-256-4100. Our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco at 257-1776. Wits End at 417-372-2027. It's Wits End Classic Barbershop. Our friends at Battery Station, batterystation.com, or 417-257-7799. And Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, where you can get yourself a great lunch. And then as well, make sure that you visit the two locations for Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. They can be found on 14 and 63 in West Plains at Old Granny's Cafe. And then you can also find the other location straight across the street from the City Pool on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Make sure that you use their drive-thru if you don't want to get out of the car when the weather is bad. We'll be happy to have you. They offer the lowest guaranteed prices on tobacco products, and in their northern location on 14 and 63, also on liquor and wine and beer and things like that. They have this monster ice-cold beer cave up there. Okay. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Communicate with me by sending an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to look a little bit at this debt dump that's going on, and what does that bode for us as a nation? Because, listen, folks, if they're not buying our debt, you got to wonder who is. Why is Europe buying our debt when they got so much of their own? We're going to look at it.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. We are in our third segment this morning. As you know, we broadcast every morning from 8 a.m. onward, typically till about 9:45. We broadcast our show live on americasvoicenow.org, and we also stream it via audio and video there. But we also stream it on audio at another great website I'd like you to visit, which is Patriot FB. Patriot FB. Patriot FB is an outstanding location that is a site where you can go and essentially have an alternative to Facebook. If you're not aware, Facebook is laden with censorship. They cut stories off and stuff that I put up all the time. In fact, YouTube does it too. Why do you think some of these videos... Yesterday I posted videos that have 0 views. How can that be? I've never had that before. Facebook and YouTube, these companies are determined to keep silent in the face of... or to keep you uninformed in the face of their tyranny and their support of what's happening and what's wrong with our nation. Patriot FB gives you an alternative to that. In fact, I'm not the only program that streams live on there. I'm there from 8 in the morning till about 9:45. Then there's a program on from 10 o'clock, Resurrect the Republic. That's an excellent program as well, and I encourage you to go visit there and listen to that. You can get to any of these, by the way, by going to patriotfb.com/radio, and you can just listen anytime you want. That you can do it on your cell phone. You can do it however you like. We also have J.J. McCartney, who comes on from 2 to 4. And J.J. has a patriot's heart and a Christian's heart, and he is he's an outstanding guy. By the way, 30-year history in radio. I mean, the guy's got, the guy's been in radio for forever. There is music that plays in between these programs. On Tuesday nights, Cowboy Logic comes on with Donna Fiducia. And then every night from 9 till midnight comes the Midnight Patriot. That's with Jeff Norton. These are all patriotic radio programs, and we encourage you to participate in them because you're getting an alternative media view that you're not going to get anywhere else. What we're seeing everywhere else in the mainstream media is just lies and misdirection and manipulation and propaganda. We're trying to give you the truth about what's happening there. So we encourage you to to participate with us on Patriot FB if there's any way that you can. Sign up there. They do have high security, by the way, so if you get knocked out of there on a security issue, just send an email to Jeff Norton. I think it's Jeff Norton at themidnightpatriot.com, and that way you can at least, he'll be able to clear you to get in. The security is tight because there's so many trolls that jump on there and try to throw, broomsticks into the spokes. It's amazing to me. These people, either they have nothing else to do or they're paid. I don't get it. But you won't experience some of the same stuff that's going on around the globe and around Facebook that you on Patriot FB. So anyhow, by the way, there's a friend of mine who runs a farm site there, and it's called theheritagehills.com. Dan is a buddy of mine, and he listens on Patriot FB. You can get to his website by going to theheritagehills.com. And he sells, beef and meat products that are all natural, 100%. If you ever have an opportunity to call him, you can also reach him via phone at 417-231-4902. And he also has a website called survivalbypreparedness.com. Survivalbypreparedness.com. The idea of that site is that he's got some products on there that are for sale and stuff, but he also posts a lot of blog information up there. So great site for you to visit. Dan's a buddy. He's a good guy, and he's a patriot. So visit those two sites and help yourself out. By the way, on our website at americasvoicenow.org, on the upper left when you first get on there, there's a whole list of sites that we have supported and have links to. And some of those are some of the sources that we use every day. And so I encourage you to find out more about those sites and visit them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happened yesterday or Monday, because China and Japan have sold off quite a bit of their treasury paper. Now, treasury paper, for the record, is the national debt of the United States. And some of it can be sold, some of it can't be sold. There is two different ways to look at treasury paper or the debt of the United States. Some of it can be sold in the public arena, and some cannot. But in this case, China and Japan, which are the two largest holders of U.S. debt, both offloaded quite a bit of paper. And it's interesting that as they're offloading that paper, the nation of Belgium, which, for the record, Belgium is the heart of the Euro, the Eurozone. Belgium is the heart of the Eurozone, And they stepped in and bought an enormous amount of this debt that China was and Japan were releasing. So the question is, why was that? Well, the truth is that China is doing two different things simultaneously. One, they are attempting to reduce their holdings of American debt while simultaneously boosting the value of their own currency and trying to simultaneously promote the yuan as the new world's reserve currency, replacing the dollar, right? Bear in mind that if they're successful at that, then all their holdings of U.S. money become, for all intents and purposes, much less valuable, right? If they reduce, if the yuan were to replace, as an example, the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, suddenly the value of the dollar would drop, and that means that all the $1.3 trillion of debt that they hold would drop significantly as well. What's interesting is, and Zero Hedge has this article out there, it's linked on our site and so forth, it says this happened at a time when Chinese FX reserves, that's Forex, currency conversion and currency trading, reserves soared to all-time highs, and when China had gobs of spare cash lying around and was not investing in U.S. paper, which should be quite troubling to anyone who follows the nuanced game theory between the U.S. and its largest external creditor, and the signals that China sends to the world when it comes to its confidence in the United States. What is truly surprising is that despite the plunge in Chinese holdings and Japanese holdings, which also dropped by $4 billion in December, total foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries increased in December by one country, Belgium. Now, the truth is, Belgium is the European titular leader of the Eurozone. That's where all of that is. That's where the Eurozone's parliament is held and all the rest of that. And they have an enormous amount of their own debt that they're in trouble with. I mean, you've got countries like Greece and like Spain and like Italy and Ireland and all these nations that are in, massive financial trouble, right? Let's not forget that Greece is in the worst depression they've had in God only knows how long, maybe ever. That in Cyprus, they actually went and skimmed the top of all the bank accounts and took the money from private investors and said, have a nice day, we just needed this. Right? So what are they doing buying U.S. debt when they've got massive amounts of their and Germany is the only really stable government within the organization economically wise, and they are frankly at the point where they're tired of having to bail out all these other countries. And so what they do is impose these draconian austerity programs on these countries that they say, okay, we'll bail you out, but for all intents and purposes, you've got to follow our mandates and our dictates on how you're going to move forward. And that's where all the conflict comes from in Greece. You know, Germany says, if you want our money, you're going to have to do it our way, and you're going to have to run your country our way. And, of course, the Greeks are, you know, and by the way, for the record, you know, in Greece, if you look at that society, which relies very, very, very heavily on government handouts and dependency, you can see the future of the United States. I mean, people in Greece retire at 50. They get government pensions. For all intents and purposes, they can claim disability for almost anything. In fact, folks, pedophilia is a reason for disability in Greece, and you actually get a government pension check as a result of that. That's you get a disability payment for being a pedophile, for being a thief. That's right, being a thief entitles you to a disability payment from the government in Greece. So, when we look at the concept of how the United States is mirroring some of that with our dependency on food stamps and our dependency on welfare and our dependency on disability, especially disability, you got to wonder, are we not following down a path which obviously leads to ruin? The answer is yes. The question is, why? Well, I want you to take a look at Venezuela. In the news this morning, there is, now, Venezuela, if you're not familiar, just so I'll bring you up to speed real quick, Chavez was the guy in power over there. He was a dictator there. He died. He got sick, and he was replaced by his kind of handpicked leader, if you will. Well, yesterday, the leader of the Venezuelan opposition was actually arrested, and he turned himself in because they demanded that he do so. But he was arrested, and their protesters are, you know, they're in this major upheaval. And the truth is that the real problem that they have at this stage in the game is Maduro, who's the president of Venezuela right at the moment. Sorry, I'm doing too many things at once. He is, for all intents and purposes, the entire nation is dependent on the government for almost all of its basic needs. As an example, they have shortages of the most basic necessities down there, like toilet paper, and they have these rolling blackouts that roll through the entire nation. And the successor to Chavez, Maduro, he is cracking down across the board on anyone who steps up to disagree. He doesn't have Chavez's military connection. And so I want you to watch Venezuela because there's some similarities and some synchronicity between their situation and ours. I'm going to tell you what it is right now. Chavez came from the military, and so he was kind of a military leader, if you will, during his reign. He got cancer and died. Maduro is not. And as a result, he comes from outside the military, and the military down there is kept in line and kept loyal to the government by allowing them to be involved in the cocaine distribution business. I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? They're part of the cocaine distribution market down there. Well, here's the problem. If Maduro can't hang on to that connection between the military and the federal government, then it could well be what we saw over in Egypt, where the military says, we don't have a connection to you, we don't owe you any loyalty, and frankly, we can do the job better ourselves, and you're out of there. The problem is that the military is being called on as these protests are raised, and as the situation becomes more dire, they're going to be called upon to strong arm the general population. And that's the correlation what we're seeing with the United States. When we're talking about the risk of how will the military respond against their own civilians, this is the kind of thing that we are looking at in the United States as a risk, right? I mean, how many times have we heard that, right now military leadership in the United States is being asked to commit to how they will handle the things like, will you disarm Americans? Will you fire upon Americans? In fact, we've had 200 or so military officers, flag officers on down, who have been relieved of command or retired out or removed out or whatever, pushed out, because they have not acquiesced to those requests. And I don't think those requests started only or exclusively with Obama. This is, the end of a long line of treasonous tyrants, and Bush and before him, and Clinton before that, and Bush the senior. And listen, that goes back decades, folks. But the point is that when you're sitting here and you're looking at the Arab Spring that we saw over in Egypt, where the people, went in a massive display of solidarity. I mean, you had 33 million people out of 84 million or 85 million who actually went and demanded that the government quit and leave, the Muslim Brotherhood. And they were successful to the extent that they got them out of there. The problem is that they didn't have an interim government to put it in its place. The same problem exists in Venezuela, but they don't know that the military is either going to come to their rescue or not. And it's a problem. The one difference that they have is in Venezuela is that they have a very, very strong petroleum industry, and that is what keeps their unions in power, and that's basically what provides the government with money. Venezuela is an oil-rich country. And even though Egypt theoretically could be, I suppose, their infrastructure is so mangled up at this point that they really can't utilize that. What I guess my point is that we're seeing this kind and this level of disruption around the world because people everywhere are seeing the oppressiveness of what our governments are doing to us. It's the same fight going on in the Ukraine, folks. In the Ukraine, the president there was told to join the Eurozone and the European Union, and instead of doing that, he simply said, no, I'm going to side and ally myself back with the Russian Federation again. And the people were like, no, that's not what we want. He said, it doesn't really matter what you want, it matters what I want. And of course, he's a Putin puppet, so he went and tried to cut the deal anyway. In the Ukraine, these people are fighting in the streets over it. You don't hear a lot about, you see it as a blurb, quick run across the news or something like that, but nobody's looking at it in depth. Because all of these situations are just a mirror of what we're going through in our nation down in the future. In other words, is this what the United States will look like at some period in time in the future, in the near future? Our government clearly no longer represents us. They've become extraordinarily oppressive. They do things that are outside of our authority and permission, like the TPP, which is being negotiated in secret. It'll strip our nation of any sovereignty we have left. Our courts are corrupt. Our Congress is corrupt. Our president is not even a citizen. How the heck did we let that happen? Look at what's happening around you and recognize it for what it is. These situations, our debt, which is so massive, being bought by the European Union, those guys don't have two nickels to rub together. They don't have a window to open or all right, I'll leave that analogy alone. But look, when China is dumping our debt and Japan is pushing our debt down and the Eurozone is picking it up, that should be an indicator that this bubble of a financial system that we keep playing with is really not as solid as those people would give you. And in fact, I read an article the other day about George Soros and how he's hedging his $11 billion investment fund against a U.S. collapse, economic collapse. These people, I guess their attitude is that they've got so much they've got so much protection because they are completely encapsulated in their own bubbles. They're wealthy. They have already taken measures to protect themselves and their families. And at this point, they're, playing with us like we're a bunch of pawns. And, there's no real, it's almost like a kid with a video game. There's no real consequence for the death. I don't know. I see bad things on the horizon for us fiscally and economically. And when we look at some of the scenarios that are happening around the world about how the United States has lost, for all intents and purposes, all of its political strength, that none of this bodes well for us. I mean, we're basically stripping our own country of our resources and handing them off around the world. And it's not just Obama. Yeah, he's accelerated it, but he's not the only one responsible for it. NAFTA and CAFTA weren't signed by Obama. Those treaties have been in place for years and been acting as an intravenous drainage of our national resources for decades. I don't understand how people who allege that they represent a nation can be so destructive of that which they claim to. I don't know. I'm so discouraged about the state of where we stand as a nation and how we're going to move forward to resolve that. I don't know. I don't see anything good on the horizon here for a resolution. At least not a peaceful one that is going to be beneficial to the rank and file members of the country. I just think the elitists have made a determination that they're going to have this global governance no matter what, one way or the other, and we're all going to have to live with it or suffer the consequences of fighting against it. It seems pretty plain to me. Okay, you're listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to hit on our final topic, which is who really represents and presents the greatest threat to America. And the reason I threw that one out there is because I think you're going to look at it internally as the greatest threat to America is not terrorism from externally or anything along those lines. The greatest threat to America is actually right here from our own internal government. When I talk about that, I'm going to talk about the police state that we've been developing and building. How, I mean, people left and right. I mean, we've had more people killed by those people sworn to protect and serve than we lost in Iraq. Something's wrong with that, folks. When when murder at the hands of law enforcement becomes a national epidemic, and we've got a government that utilizes false flags to drive us one way or another, there's something desperately wrong with that. And I don't know whether people don't see it or they just want to continue to just hide their eyes and pretend it's really not happening. But it is happening. Who really presents the greatest threat? Even public polls say it's our own government, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial spots on radio. When we come back, we'll try to tackle this topic. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can email me, and I'd like to hear from you. I want to hear feedback from our listenership. You can send me email to Mike at americasvoicenow.org. That's Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you utilize our listen line at 415-325-0725. You can call in and listen to the program at your leisure. Using any standard telephone, you'll get the particular episode for that day. We'll be right back. Welcome back to America's Voice Now. We had an article that I posted up on AVN and on our website and Facebook channels and so forth. And it concerned the idea that we have a problem with the fact that there's been some concerns about issues of who is the greatest threat to the United States. Is it Iran with a nuclear weapon? The other day, Japan, it was revealed, is working to develop their own version of the nuclear weapon. Is it a nation, a rogue nation like, Iran, who is going to try to defeat us militarily? Or there was an article out that I posted. It's called Iran Ships Are a Dry Run for a Later Nuclear/EMP Attack. And it was in the Washington Examiner, and it was an interesting article because it had a fairly interesting theory about it that wasn't without some substance. And the reason for that is because EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, which basically fries all the electronics in its wake, that's an easy and cheap and fast way to accomplish that. You would actually take the fight home immediately. In other words, it would bust us down from the inside, right? Because if we had a grid destruction or an EMP that was able to fry a significant percentage of the American electronic, I mean, we live in an electronic world, folks. I don't think most people have really sat down and put any real thought into contemplating what would happen if we had no electricity, even for a relatively short period of time, a couple months. I mean, especially if it was national. If it was an isolated pocket or something, that's one thing. But, when I talked about that attack where they shot up an electric unit or location in San Jose, and, no one knows what the deal is with that. It's a big, it's another big secret. They kept it from us for almost a year that it actually occurred. And the point is that the electrical system in the United States is a weak point for us. And we're not the only ones who know it, right? And we've talked repeatedly about, trying to shore up the grid in the United States. And for whatever reason, Congress just seems to be willing to sit on their hands. They're willing to blow $1 trillion on a farm bill, but they're not willing to throw, a few billion, or I don't even care if it was $50 billion at fixing our grid. What's wrong with them? Well, one of the responses that came out was that one of the people who listens to the program on a routine basis commented back. He said, I think Iranian and Syrian threats are more propaganda than anything else. And I agree with him on that point. I think the goal of our government is to occupy Iran, Syria, and the Ukraine, and soon Venezuela. They are all very important pieces in the global chess game. I also think that we are lied to on every front, and that they are feeding on the fear and the concern of people who can see something is wrong but just don't know what. This is quite articulate from Russ here. And it's spot on. He's actually quite accurate here. If we weren't running an empire, the world would seem so small. Whatever happens in this country, I promise it won't be Iran, Syria, North Korea, China, or Russia. It will be our own government frothing the mouths of the underinformed, indoctrinated fools who will demand violence while giving away their own rights. It's worked before, almost 13 years ago. After the Iran and Syria comes Russia and China. Then what? What will the war machine turn on after that? I don't believe for a second any of this has anything to do with security or our nation or our rights. I think it is the establishment of a global government, and the U.S. is the enforcement division and nothing more. He's actually quite accurate in some of those comments. The point is that the real threat that we have to our nation now is not some terrorist threat from outside. I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that when we look at what has occurred from a terrorist standpoint, it really doesn't have the hallmarks of. I don't believe for a moment that 9/11 was completely, nobody knew it was happening and it just slipped on by. I mean, I'm not saying that we were responsible for it, but I'm saying that somebody knew it was happening. And I don't know enough about it to be able to, show any evidence to that, but I can say that there's so many questions out there and so much misinformation, misdirection, and propaganda that's shoved at us from our government that it leads us to question these things. And I don't have the answers. I'm just, I'm a flea on the elephant's behind, folks. But the truth is, I believe that our own government is a greater threat to us than those of foreign governments. They are feeding us a lot of propaganda about Syria and Iran and Afghanistan and North Korea, China, Russia. Your job, my job, is to make sure that we are taking the time to look beyond the initial face that they show us. Look beyond the initial story that they provide for you, because that is essentially propaganda, folks. I mean, let's be candid about what we're looking at here. Our media has been complicit, complacent, and willing to betray the trust of the American people by allowing this to go on and allowing this to continue. They refuse to expose that which they should and could. Perfect example is the TPP earlier. I talked about it earlier. Where are the investigative journalists on the TPP and the TTIP? There aren't any. There is no investigative journalism left in the United States because they're all owned by the same corporate masters that are driving this globalist nonsense. And in large part, we are the mercenaries of the globalists. The United States. We are the mercenaries of the globalists. I mean, we're put into these situations, and our young men and women are told that this is for fighting for freedom and liberty. Listen, we're sitting over there pitching democracy, which we aren't even practicing ourselves, for crying out loud, to Afghanistan, who doesn't even want it. And it's all so empty and hollow when we look at what happened over in Iraq. Here we spent how many lives of our young men and women, how much national treasure, only to walk away from it at the end and allow it to collapse right back into what it was. It's even worse now than what it was when Saddam Hussein was in power. I'm not saying Saddam was a good guy. I'm just saying that the people who live in Iraq are in worse shape today than they probably were under him. How can we sit there and say that we're shipping democracy and a Republican form of government overseas when we don't practice it ourselves? I find that this whole issue of manipulation by our politicians and our media, to me, is the greatest threat that we have. Because, and I broke this story months ago, in the Federal Register, they have obviated the limitation on utilizing propaganda against the United States of America. There was a legal prohibition against it. They've lifted it. Most people don't even know that. And the simple fact is that when you're talking about propaganda and its ability to influence the public, that is our own government working against us. They're lying and misrepresenting to us what the facts are, not only domestically, but globally. If they are, and I don't think anyone at this point can deny they are, what would be their motive? What's the end result of all of that? It's not just so that these guys can stay in short-term power. There's a bigger picture, a bigger plan. The real threat to our nation is the fact that our media and our government are in bed together. That the two are helping support each other in their efforts and drive and motivation to turn this nation into something that none of us want or will recognize. And the media has so much influence. They can make what Obama says sound like it's good stuff. I mean, look at how many people have been fooled by it. I saw a poll the other day that said that 71%, I think it was 71% of people who voted for Obama would not vote for him again. But that's not enough. The problem that we have is not really a question of would these people vote for him again. They wouldn't vote Romney in either. That same poll said that, those people wouldn't have voted Romney in. And I think, it's easy to, as an armchair quarterback, to look back in history and say, well, I shouldn't have voted for Obama. But when the next person comes up, when it's Hillary against God only knows who the Republicans are going to put up there, are we not going to see the same rout at the polls that we saw in 08 and 12? I mean, the media is already building Hillary Clinton up like she's the de facto president already. I mean, look at the stuff that they pump out about her. It's embarrassing. I see it and I read it or I hear it, and I'm telling you, my skin crawls. Because it's like they are already putting her in the de facto position of president. It's a fait accompli. The biggest problem that we have as a threat to our nation is our own media and the lies that our own representatives are telling us. Because all the other threats we hear about, we don't even know if they're real. But this one, we see and smell and taste it's real because it's right here in our face. Should we be nervous about a terrorist attack in the United States? Yes. But the truth of the matter is you have a greater chance of being killed by your own government than you do from some dirty bomb or some explosion in some city somewhere or the detonation of a nuclear device or even an EMP. The real problem, as I see it, is that even if this government at any point begins to feel like it's looking at the loss of its power, what it'll end up doing is utilizing some sort of a false flag to accomplish the goal that it can't get on its own. Don't tell me that we don't have those people. I mean, you can't be real when you tell me that, remember the Maine? How about the Lusitania? How about Pearl Harbor? How about the Gulf of Tonkin? I mean, everybody is capable of going out and looking that information up and seeing that all of that was a false flag to get us involved in a war. Bush with the WMD for Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Even the liberals will agree to that one. In fact, that's their main, rally cry. Same thing in Afghanistan. We're going to go in and get those terrorists who blew up the World Trade Center. Come on, man. I mean, really. Why did it take us 13 years, and why are we still there? We're spending our blood and our treasure to defend against a phantom threat that really belongs in the seat of power in D.C. The 10 square miles of treason that is working against everything that our Constitution and our foundational beliefs and principles and precepts and concepts ever stood for. I know that's not popular to say, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. Look at what's going on around you. I mean, just the debt aspect alone is a great threat to the American sovereignty and our ability to function as a nation. And these guys, I mean, they just passed a $1 trillion farm bill. Please. They gave the president a blank check when we're already 17 plus trillion in debt, and they gave him a blank check for the next 13 months. They didn't lift the ceiling and then move it up a notch or two. They just literally took the ceiling away and said, Obama, you can borrow as much as you want between now and March of 2015. We don't know what that number will look like. But if past history is any indication of future performance, we can be guaranteed we're going to see at least another trillion, maybe $1.5 trillion, at minimum. Minimum, folks. You're talking about an additional $1 trillion to $1.3 trillion at minimum. God only knows what he could come up with as an excuse between now and March of 2015 to say, well, we got to tack on another $1 trillion on top of that to cover the shortage of Obamacare. I mean, really. In fact, we haven't even seen the beginning of that the beginning of that debacle of a bailout of the insurance companies, which we know is in the bill. We don't know what the price tag is. It's another one of these, phantom. I mean, look, there's nothing that is honest or true that's coming out of your government right now. Nothing at all. Everything you see, everything you hear from them is a lie or a misdirection or a manipulation, and it's all propaganda. The media is complicit. The great threat that we have in the United States of America is that we have lost control of those who govern us. They no longer govern by our consent. That's it in a nutshell, folks. We've lost control. I don't know how we get it back. Surely we can't do so at the voting booth. I mean, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes. If you think 2014 is going to be devoid of fraud, think again. The national tone right now is so, negative against the Democrats with Obamacare and all the rest of that. You watch how many people pull it out. How many of those Democrats will actually get reelected? And you're going to know fraud is happening in a massive way. There are actions that our states, can take. We can institute, things like voting limitations and like Missouri is doing, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, where, they push back against federal overreach. But ultimately, we can't control what they do with the national debt, which I don't care how insulated you can make your state. If the national currency collapses, that's going to affect your state no matter what they do. I got to tell you, in my way of thinking, and certainly I'm not mainstream about this, the problem that we have is that 10 square miles in Washington, D.C. has become an unannounced tyrannical dictator. The Congress is participating in it and unwilling to stop it. They're talking about filing a lawsuit. The courts are in on it. I read an article yesterday that they're talking about filing a lawsuit against Obama for this unconstitutional, things about and executive actions related to Obamacare and other things. We don't have years for that stuff to wend its way through the courts. And already the courts have found against him on stuff like the National Labor Relations Board appointments and things like that. It still doesn't matter. You've got Eric Holder, who's been found guilty of civil and criminal action. I mean, here's a guy who is supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the country, and he stands up there and he lies and he lies to the face of Congress, and he gets caught at it, and nobody can do a thing about it. You can't even get the guy out. Impeachment's not an option. The Senate's owned by Harry Reid. 2014 is going to be an election that I think is one way or the other going to send this country in the final tailspin or offer some short respite. But I got to tell you, I don't have a lot of faith that we're not going to see this thing go into a tail. If and even if Republicans can hold the day and, let's say, take the Senate back, what kind of a job have they been doing for us when they owned the House? What kind of a job have they been doing for us when they owned the House and the Senate, too? They still betrayed us. They just did it their way instead of the other way. I mean, really. Both these parties are not interested in you. You're just fodder. You're firewood to keep the flame moving. They don't really care about you. It's shameful that our country has gotten to this point and that we don't have anybody who can stand up as a leader and say, I'm for the right things. That can say, and is in a position to have pure motive to actually do what's right for the country. There's no George Washingtons. There's no Thomas Jeffersons. There's no Madisons available to us. There's no Patrick Henrys out there. Those few that are silenced. You know, I kind of jokingly refer to this radio program as my Paul Revere moment, because I do this as just because I'm tired of waiting for somebody else to stand up and say something. But I'm silenced. Go look at the number of YouTube views this thing gets. A couple of hundred. A couple thousand people on the internet. A couple thousand people on the radio. You got to be kidding me. There's 700 videos up there. How is it that those... but, you know, I can do a dog trick video and I can get 6 million views. Come on. I mean, I get it. People don't want to hear bad news. And I grant you that usually I'm discussing and exposing bad news. But that doesn't account for the lack of views that these programs get. Just saying. I get it. I'm abrasive. Some people don't like that. But, you know, you can't tell me that there's only 250 people that on all of the millions and millions and millions and millions of people on YouTube, other than the fact that YouTube is doing everything they can to suppress it. That's my point. The threats that we have are from here. They are us. They are our failure to stand up and defend and protect our own nation. They are your failure and mine to take action against what has clearly become a deplorable level of oppression from our own government, state and federal. Federal is obviously far more, far greater, but it's no excuse on the state levels. Look at Cuomo. I mean, you got to be kidding me. What a little fascist. Cuomo, what a fascist. I cannot believe that New York State actually allows that guy to run. And de Blasio, I mean, how does he win in a... He's going to run the greatest city in the world into the ground. All right, we're down to the last 2 minutes. I think the real, in summation, folks, the real greatest threat is, one, ourselves, because we're refusing to stand up and put forth the sacrifice that's necessary and do the hard work that's going to be required of us to take this nation back. And our primary enemy is not some far-off land, not some guy in a turban living in a cave somewhere. It's right in Washington, D.C., in a $2,500 suit that he bought with your money. You can find us every day at americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you visit our sponsors. If you have an opportunity to, you can find our friends over at Battery Station at batterystation.com/America. Batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. You can also visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. Those guys offer a great service, and I encourage you to participate with them. They are right in front, right behind Wits End Classic Barbershop, where you can go get yourself a great haircut for $10. If you have an opportunity to visit our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, please do so, and just send word through your server to the manager, Bruce, there, that you just want to tell him that you appreciate and thank him for sponsoring AVN. Jason Henry at the law offices of Jason Henry at 417-256-4100. State and federal cases are his specialty. Make sure that you visit our friends over at the Mini Mart Express 1 and 2, both of them located in West Plains. One on the corner of 14 and 63, the other on across from People's Park in West Plains. And I encourage you to go in there and visit with these folks. If you have an opportunity to have a new website developed for your business, I'd love to talk to you about that. You can reach the folks over at airbridgeweb.com. airbridgeweb.com. It's like air like you breathe, bridge like you drive over, web like a spider. and or you can call them at 417-204-4064. If you don't get a direct answer, just leave a message. I can't answer that phone all the time. That's a company I own, by the way. So, for full disclosure. All right. You all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow morning. God bless you.